Welcome back. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like. Enjoy the video. Leoncio Sanchez was one of the most influential figures in the capital. He resided in his townhouse in the city center and experienced a deep sense of loneliness. However, he would never admit that, even to himself. Leoncio was perpetually occupied with negotiations, business trips, and meetings. He never had a moment to pause and reflect. He navigated through life confidently and decisively, like an arrow aimed at a target. Sanchez was both envied and admired. He was frequently invited to television shows and interviewed. Everyone wanted to uncover the secret behind his success, and Leoncio willingly shared his time management and business strategies. Yet, no one could truly approach him or reach the heights of the 45-year-old bachelor millionaire. This minor inconvenience arose when Leoncio returned from Switzerland and stopped by his home to change. His devoted maid, Teresa, who had diligently cleaned his residence for over 8 years, submitted her resignation. "I'm sorry, Senor Sanchez, but my children want to escape the noise of the capital and move closer to the sea, so they're taking me with them. I'm truly sorry to leave such a place, and I've grown fond of you as if you were a son. But there's nothing that can be done. I genuinely want to spoil my grandchildren soon, and my daughter-in-law is pregnant." Leoncio merely frowned in response. Always these family circumstances. In his view, family and other attachments only brought complications to the orderly and well-structured life he had meticulously crafted. Yes, the millionaire often behaved more like a machine than a human. But in the realm of large-scale business, there was no alternative. You either pressed on, regardless of everything, or you lost everything. He generously compensated Teresa and called his secretary to arrange for a new maid, specifying that she should be unmarried and childless. "It would be ideal if you could find me someone plain, Sylvia," he instructed his secretary. "Someone who stays home in the evenings and isn't too attractive to men. That type will stick around for a long time." "Understood, Senor Sanchez," Sylvia replied. "I'll do my utmost." The following day, Leoncio met her for the first time. She appeared very modest. A gray, slightly worn sweater, a black skirt below the knees, chestnut hair tied back in a simple ponytail, blue eyes peeking through glasses. On her feet were rugged, old-fashioned boots. She spoke softly and shyly, constantly fiddling with the strap of her bag. "Just what I need," thought Sanchez with satisfaction. As always, Sylvia is spot on. And where did she find her? It feels as though this girl was standing in a museum as an ancient exhibit yesterday. "What's your name?" the millionaire asked the new maid. "Blanca," she answered quietly, too shy to meet his gaze. "Excellent." Blanca nodded. "Leon, you'll come every morning, even when I'm not here, and tidy up. The bedding needs changing every other day. Ensure to dust the plants and the glasses in the cabinets daily. At the end of the cleaning, you need to put on white socks and walk through all the rooms. If the socks remain white, you've done the job perfectly and can go home. Yes. If not, please clean the floors. Is that clear to you?" Blanca nodded obediently and replied softly, "Yes, Senor Sanchez." Is she really this quiet? Or is she acting? Leoncio wondered. She needs to be tested. ... When the girl departed, he walked into his office and opened both safes he had. Transferring money from one to the other, he opened a bundle and carelessly tossed a dozen large bills into the empty safe. Then he closed the first one, leaving the second one slightly ajar, enough to be noticeable. "Let's see if she's as modest as she appears at first glance," Leoncio thought smugly, and activated the surveillance camera. The next day, he packed his suitcase and flew out on another business trip. Leoncio returned after 2 days. Upon entering the house, he immediately noticed a pleasant fragrance in the hall. He walked through the rooms. Everything was clean and neat, not a speck of dust, not a single crumb on the floor. Leoncio decided to take a relaxing bath first. The bathroom was also spotless. On the table were unpacked shampoo, shaving cream, and a new toothpaste. Leoncio admired the maid's attention to detail. He hadn't mentioned anything to her about purchasing personal hygiene products. Clearly, she noticed they were running low. After bathing, He donned his favorite dark blue terry cloth robe and soft slippers and made his way to his office. So far I'm satisfied, but let's see what the video reveals, Leoncio muttered to himself. Although he felt fatigued after the flight, he had a habit of making decisions promptly. Yes. If she didn't take anything from the safe, I won't have any further questions about her candidacy, the millionaire thought. He turned on the TV screen and displayed the image of the room, rewinding the video to the desired moment. He fast-forwarded it, settled on the couch, and began watching. The spectacle was rather mundane. The maid entered the office in her black uniform with a white apron and started cleaning. She neatly stacked the papers and folders scattered on the desk, mopped the floor, dusted the secretary's bookshelves and safes. Leoncio yawned and fast-forwarded the video until Blanca appeared. The next day, everything repeated. The same monotonous actions that nearly lulled Leoncio to sleep. Now, however, this time, the maid walked across the floor in white socks with a serious and even tense expression, which amused Sanchez. Just as he was about to turn off the video, satisfied that the maid hadn't touched his money, Blanca entered his office again. She was already dressed in her street clothes, the same gray sweater and wide dark blue jeans. She stood in the middle of the office for a moment, as if hesitating. Leoncio leaned forward, watching the screen intently. What was she about to do? Hesitating. Finally, determination appeared on Blanca's face. She approached the bookshelves and picked up a book. The millionaire stood up from the couch to see better. Was she going to borrow something from his home library? She truly is a bookworm, Leoncio thought with a laugh. His surprise was profound when he saw that Blanca wasn't holding a book at all, but his old photo album. Leoncio couldn't believe his eyes. Why did she need his photographs? In disbelief, he watched as the girl hastily flipped through the pages. The video paused on one page, and she pulled out a photograph. Then she looked around sneakily and quickly tucked it into her pocket. Leoncio Sanchez was filled with rage. Kids. Could this girl really be a journalist, a paparazzi who had deceitfully infiltrated his home? So that's why she wanted to appear so humble. Quote, dot. The millionaire turned off the video and rushed to the bookshelf, finding the album. He angrily flipped through the pages. All the photos were in their places except for one. Exhausted, Leoncio sank onto the couch, letting the album drop to the floor, and stared blankly ahead for an extended period. He wasn't contemplating anything, not recalling anything, but his heart was painfully gripped by what felt like long-forgotten bitterness and disappointment. Leoncio didn't know how long he remained there, motionless. His strange trance broke with the loud ticking of the clock. The millionaire stood up, brushed aside damp strands of hair fallen over his face, and calmly exited the office. The next day, he would instruct Sylvia to arrange a meeting with the new maid in his office, and right now he only knew one thing. He needed to rest to be at his best. The following day, he had a challenging conversation ahead. The next morning, Leoncio Sanchez woke up 10 minutes before the alarm. It was a habit he had developed over the years. He got up, took a shower, and brewed some coffee. After drinking it, he got dressed and headed to the office. Sylvia, as usual, greeted him in the reception area. She was wearing a red suit, and the tall, slender blonde looked as striking as ever. She rightly considered herself the face of the company. "Good morning, Mr. Sanchez," the girl said cheerfully. "How was your trip?" "Excellent, as always," Leoncio replied briskly. "Sylvia, I have a request for you." "What is it, sir?" "Call the new maid. Have her come here to the office. I need to talk to her. The sooner the better." "All right, Mr. Sanchez. I'll call right away." Leoncio nodded to Sylvia and disappeared into his office. An hour later, Blanca timidly knocked on his door. "Come in," he called. Leoncio Sanchez frowned and crossed his arms over his chest as the girl awkwardly entered and sat across from him. "So," Leoncio said somewhat sharply, "confess, which newspaper do you work for?" Blanca raised her eyebrows in surprise and gazed at the millionaire with confusion. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she stammered. "But I believe you understand perfectly well," Sanchez replied in an uncompromising tone. "I saw everything. There was a camera in the office." Blanca paled and lowered her gaze. Silence enveloped the office for a moment. "You mean the photograph I took from the album?" the girl whispered finally. "Exactly," Leoncio confirmed. He was angry and irritated. How skillfully she pretends to be an innocent lamb, he thought to himself. Blanca looked up at him again with her blue eyes. Yes, I took it, but I swear I don't work for a newspaper, and I didn't intend to publish it. There was a sincerity in her tone that struck the man. Either she's a good actress or she's telling the truth, he thought fleetingly. Then why did you take the photograph? And why? He paused, gathering strength, and concluded, "This one?" Blanca's chin trembled, betraying her struggle to hold back tears. "Mr. Sanchez, I took this picture because it shows you with my mother." Those words resonated like thunder in a clear sky. Leoncio Sanchez literally lost his ability to speak upon hearing them. "What did you say?" he asked hesitantly. Could he have misheard? "In the photograph I took from your album, my mother," the girl repeated quietly. "Lord, your mother?" he asked, still unable to believe this was happening to him. Blanca nodded. "But how is this possible? It can't be a coincidence." Blanca looked him in the eyes and nodded again. "Of course not," she replied disdainfully. "I knew from the beginning what kind of scoundrel I was getting involved with by taking this job." Leoncio Sanchez was stunned. He suspected that Blanca was merely playing the role of a modest and quiet girl. But he never imagined she was capable of hurling insults directly at him. "How dare you?" he erupted, regaining some composure. "You stole something that belongs to me? And now you allow yourself to make such statements? How dare you?" Blanca met his gaze calmly and coldly. "I took one thing from you, but you stole everything from my mother," she unexpectedly exclaimed. Leoncio's heart ached with pain. "Me? I stole?" "She betrayed me." Blanca narrowed her eyes and lifted her chin proudly. "What are you talking about? My mother is not capable of such things." But Leoncio Sanchez no longer processed her words. Memories of distant days, which he had long suppressed in an effort to erase from his memory, burst forth and now assaulted him with furious force. He closed his eyes and involuntarily transported himself back 22 years. At that time, Leoncio had just graduated from university and was actively seeking his first job. He came from an ordinary family with no connections to rely on. Sanchez already understood then that he should depend solely on himself. He walked into company offices and personally handed his resume to the secretaries of the bosses. Folklore was the assistant to the director of one of the promising firms engaged in logistics. When Leoncio first looked into her blue eyes, he felt as if struck by lightning. He was so taken with this slim, red-haired girl. The young man knew that asking for a number was too bold, but at the same time, he felt that he wouldn't get another chance. So, blushing and stuttering, he dared to suggest meeting her for lunch. Lure, glancing at his worn-out suit with a condescending look, agreed. They met the next day, and Leoncio took Lure to a restaurant that was clearly beyond his means. However, he felt that she deserved to dine only there, so he decisively spent his last money on fine wine and expensive dishes. Lure was clearly impressed. It seemed she had never been to such places before, just like Leoncio himself. Later they laughed a lot, reminiscing about the pompous rich people at neighboring tables. The first date was followed by the second, third, and fourth. Leoncio and Lure enjoyed each other's company. They had plenty to talk about, and were surprised to find that they often understood each other with just a half word. Gradually, the young man realized that he couldn't picture his life without Lure, and decided to introduce her to his parents. Leoncio was extremely nervous, but his anxiety turned out to be unfounded. The family dinner went splendidly. The atmosphere was warm and pleasant. Mom and Dad looked at Lure with admiration, and Leoncio felt a sense of pride and joy. That evening, he confessed his love to the girl for the first time. They stood on the veranda. The evening was warm, and the stars shone above them. Leoncio felt that no one in the world was happier than him. He and Lure held hands tightly. Then he leaned toward her ear and whispered, "I want you to be my wife." Lure laughed and whispered back, "But you haven't met my family yet. What if you change your mind?" But the young man shook his head. "Not for anything." They kissed under the stars for a long time, and then their parents called them to taste Mom's chocolate cake. The next weekend, Lure invited Leoncio to her house. "Now it's my turn to introduce you to my parents," she declared. Leoncio was nervous again, naturally even more than the first time. He spent a long time choosing a shirt, carefully ironing it, yet it still seemed wrinkled to him. Finally, he got ready and left the house. Lure's parents lived a few blocks away, so Leoncio decided to walk. On the way, he purchased flowers and chocolate for Lure, her mother, and her younger sister. The young man tried to remember her name, but he couldn't. In conversations, Lure always called her little sister Dragonfly. Just outside the house, her name finally surfaced in his mind, Federica. Lure had mentioned once that her younger sister was named after their grandfather. Leoncio knocked on the door. It swung open, revealing a red-haired girl who looked about 14. "Hi, Federica," the young man said cheerfully. "I'm Leoncio, your sister's friend." He expected the girl to smile at him, but she only furrowed her brow and muttered something incomprehensible before disappearing. Shrugging, Leoncio entered the spacious corridor. Lure's family was not poor. They lived in a large mansion with plenty of room for everyone. Moments later, Lure descended the stairs. She wore a lovely red dress with a deep neckline and a beautiful pearl necklace. Her hair was pinned up at the back, adorned with a shiny hairpin. "Oh, I see Dragonfly let you in already," she exclaimed joyfully when she saw Leoncio. "Yes," and then promptly vanished, he admitted with a laugh. "That's her style," Lure chuckled. She took the flowers and chocolates. "Let's go to the living room. Our parents are already waiting for us," Lure said. Leoncio took a deep breath and followed the girl. Lure's parents turned out to be very pleasant people and excellent conversationalists. They asked Leoncio about his work, and he willingly shared the latest news. He had managed to secure a job at a reputable company involved in investments. "We're so happy for you," Lure's mom said. "Our daughter mentioned you were looking for quite some time, and unfortunately, her company rejected your application." "Yes, that's true, but I'm not upset about it. The Lure's company has given me a treasure that turned out to be much more valuable than any of their positions," Leoncio replied, smiling gently at his girlfriend. She smiled back at him. Federica, however, grimaced at the sight. She hastily stuffed everything on her plate into her mouth and, without thanking anyone, went to her room. "Federica clearly doesn't like me," Leon said quietly to Lure. She waved her hand in response. "Don't pay attention to her, darling. She's always like that." Leoncio wanted to believe her, but something told him that Lure was mistaken. Aside from Federica's provocative behavior, the evening was a great success. When Leoncio kissed Lure goodbye and left the house, he felt elated. The worries of the past few days had receded, and he was excited that the difficult moments were behind him. Now he could calmly propose to Lure and prepare for the wedding. With his new job, he could afford a larger apartment where they both would feel cozy and comfortable. With these optimistic thoughts, Leoncio returned home, took a shower, and peacefully fell asleep. Everything was turning out just as he had envisioned, even better. An old university friend who had become a real estate agent found him a beautiful apartment in the city center overlooking a lovely park. Leoncio went to see it alone. He wanted to surprise Lure. He walked through the bright rooms, trying to imagine Lure's reaction, and it seemed to him that he couldn't find anything better. The apartment felt like it was designed for the two of them. Without further hesitation, Leoncio made the deposit. Then he went downtown to purchase a ring for Lure. He pondered over various options for a long time until he settled on a delicate and very elegant ring adorned with a pale blue topaz. Just like the color of her eyes, he thought. He bought the ring on credit, intending to pay for it with his next paycheck. Now it's just left to propose to Lure. Leoncio carefully considered the details for a long time. He wanted everything to be very beautiful and romantic. While strolling through the center, he noticed a small but cozy restaurant where a violinist was playing. He entered and ordered a cup of coffee. The waiter brought Leoncio his order, and the young man sat for a long time listening to the musician. Dreams transported him somewhere far away. He envisioned walking through life hand in hand with Lure, and how she would become his one and only. They would have children, then grandchildren, and they would spend their old age in a little house by the lake somewhere outside the city. Leoncio even shed a tear. He envisioned it all so vividly. Then he got up, paid for the coffee, and firmly decided to return here with Lure and propose to her to the beautiful sounds of the violin. It happened the following week, and everything went perfectly. Lure suspected nothing. She was more beautiful than ever. Her pink dress accentuated her fragility and tenderness. She curled her hair and let it cascade in beautiful waves down her shoulders and back. Leoncio felt like everyone around was only gazing at Lure, and he felt proud that this girl would soon be his wife. Leoncio felt like the luckiest and happiest person on earth. He was beside a beautiful woman, and things at work were going better than ever. It was like a fairy tale. When the violinist played one of the most poignant and tender melodies, Leoncio got down on one knee and proposed to Lure. She couldn't hold back her tears. Everyone around applauded. "Will you marry me?" Leoncio asked, looking at her with eyes sparkling with anticipation of happiness. "Happy enough then?" "Yes," the girl replied. "Yes, I will." The guests applauded the beautiful couple once again. Leoncio lifted Lure up and twirled her around to the enchanting sounds of the violin. When they sat down at the table, a gray-haired man with long mustaches approached them. He wore an old-fashioned checkered jacket and trousers with pleats. "You're a very beautiful couple, and I'm a retired photographer," he said softly. "It sounds strange, but I got so tired of photographing endless and monotonous weddings that 5 years ago I swore I wouldn't take another photo. But you've inspired me. There's so much love emanating from you, so allow me to take just one photo." Lure smiled and nodded. Leoncio sat next to her and embraced his beloved, and the man captured their image. A couple of days later, he sent a copy of the photo to Sanchez's office. Leoncio carefully tucked it into his planner to show Lure later. The wedding was scheduled for the end of April. There was just over a month left to prepare. However, life intervened in the lovers' perfect plans. One morning, Leoncio came to work and saw a note from his boss asking him to come to his office. Surprised and somewhat nervous, Sanchez immediately went to the chief's office. On the way, he pondered why the boss needed to see him. He genuinely hoped he wouldn't be fired for some unknown reason now. After all, the wedding was just around the corner, and moving to a new apartment, losing his job now would be unthinkable. However, Leoncio's fears were unfounded. He immediately noticed that the boss was in a good mood. He greeted him warmly with a friendly smile. "I have news for you," the boss said, "and I hope you'll be as pleased with it as I am." Leoncio smiled. "I certainly hope so too." The boss gestured to the chair opposite him, and the young man sat down. "The thing is," the boss continued, "we're opening our first overseas branch." "Oh, congratulations," Leoncio said sincerely. "I wonder what I have to do with this," he thought to himself. "And you have a direct role to play in this," said the boss, as if reading his thoughts. "Me?" Sanchez was surprised. "You excelled at university. Your diploma speaks for itself. You have excellent reviews from your professors. You've also proven yourself to be a young but very promising specialist. Here, we need people like you. That's why I've decided to appoint you as the manager of the branch that is about to open in." He didn't manage to finish his sentence because the agitated Leoncio interrupted him. "I'm very flattered, sir, but does this mean I'll have to relocate?" The boss raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem for you?" Leoncio hesitated for a few moments before responding. "The thing is, sir, I'm getting married soon." "How soon?" the boss asked, scrutinizing the young man. "In a month." The boss cleared his throat and adjusted the already perfectly arranged papers on the table. "I'm sorry, Leoncio, but this is a very important step for the company. I didn't just choose you randomly. I believe you have a great future ahead. If you lead our branch, you'll be on a path that many aspire to, but not everyone gets such a chance. Consider yourself very fortunate." Leoncio nervously adjusted his tie as if it were choking him. "But what about the wedding? Invitations have already been sent out." "Postpone it for a short while. You'll go settle in, then come back, have your wedding, and take your wife with you. It's simple." Leoncio still had doubts. "Tell me what's bothering you." The boss began to lose patience. Leoncio looked him in the eye. "I'm very worried about Lure." "What about Lure? Can't she wait?" The boss smirked sarcastically. Sanchez nodded awkwardly. The boss stood up and began to pace nervously around the room. What kind of love is it if the girl can't wait a couple of months? And why do you need such a wife? Leoncio understood that the boss's words were more than fair. But something inside him clenched at the thought of postponing the wedding and leaving Lure here. Or do you want to be hand-picked? The boss continued to protest. Your fate is at stake right now. Not just yours, but your entire future family's. Doesn't she want to live decently and ensure your children lack for nothing? Remember my words. You'll be a millionaire in no time. Do you want to miss such an opportunity? The boss's arguments sounded more than convincing, and Leoncio reluctantly agreed. Back in his office, he could barely wait for the workday to conclude. In the evening, he and Lure had agreed to have dinner together. He bought a bouquet of crimson roses and hurried to the restaurant, which was a few blocks from the office. He arrived first. Lure had written that she would be a little late. Leoncio sat at the table, rehearsing the speech he intended to deliver to his beloved for the 100th time. He had never been so nervous before, and his heart ached and didn't want to go anywhere. Finally, Lure appeared. She wore a striking dark blue dress with an open neckline. A silver bracelet sparkled beautifully on her wrist. She had swept her hair to one side and wore long silver earrings. All the men turned to look at her as she walked to the table where Leoncio was waiting. How can I leave her alone and go? He thought with jealousy as he rose. Sorry, dear. Got stuck in traffic. Lure chirped, hugging him. He handed her the bouquet. So beautiful. Thank you, darling. The girl smiled, lived to help her sit, then sat down himself and cleared his throat. He knew he was about to ruin Lure's mood, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice trembling with nerves. Lure instantly sensed his state, and the smile faded from her face. What happened? The girl asked, concerned. Leoncio recounted the details of his conversation with his boss, carefully observing his beloved's reaction. Lure pouted, but quickly composed herself. Of course, I'm upset that we'll have to postpone the wedding, but career prospects are very important for you, for us, and for our future. Your boss is right. Leoncio couldn't believe his ears. He knew Lure was sensible and rational, but he hadn't expected her to accept this news so quickly and without much emotion. What if she doesn't love me at all? He briefly thought, but he quickly dismissed his doubts. Thank you, my love, he said. I'm so glad you understand the importance of what's happening. Did you think I would make a scene over a couple of months' delay? Lure laughed. Leoncio laughed too, feeling surprisingly relieved. Yes, that's exactly what I thought. And I also don't have the money to pay for all the dishes you broke in this restaurant. The rest of the evening went splendidly. And the next day, Leoncio began preparing for his trip. Their meetings with Lure became even more tender. Both sensed that separation loomed with each passing hour. On the day before his departure, Lure came to see Leoncio. They sat on the couch and turned on some movie, but both were too distracted to follow the plot. Leoncio breathed in the scent of Lure's perfume, wanting to memorize every detail. The girl clung tightly to her beloved. Around midnight, Leoncio mentioned he would call a taxi, but Lure shook her head. Tonight, I want to stay with you. Leoncio's heart leaped in his chest. Are you sure? I thought you wanted to wait until the wedding. Lure nodded decisively. Yes, I'm sure. Tonight I want to be with you. Early in the morning, Lure left. Leoncio asked her not to see him off at the airport. He knew saying goodbye there would be even harder. He didn't want to leave her crying amid a crowd of strangers. As they said goodbye at the door, both struggled to hold back tears. I'll write as soon as I land, Leoncio whispered. Lure nodded. I'll be waiting, she said. I love you. I love you too, and I already miss you. When Leoncio closed the door, he suddenly felt very frightened. For a moment, he feared they might never see each other again. He wanted to rush out and chase after the girl, but he restrained himself. That would look foolish. They had already made their decision. He didn't know that Lure was also standing behind the door, pressing her hands to her chest but hesitating to knock. The new country welcomed Leoncio warmly. Everyone treated him with respect, which amazed the young man. He felt very young and inexperienced. At first, it was challenging for him to adjust to the new life, but gradually he began to acclimate, and it became easier for him to fulfill his obligations. Each day, he called and wrote messages to Lure. Time passed quickly, and the lovers eagerly awaited their reunion. Leoncio had already purchased the ticket. They only had to wait 2 more weeks. That evening, Leoncio called Lure as usual, but her phone was switched off. Strange, he thought. That had never happened before. The young man called back an hour later, but the result was the same. He called Lure all evening, but she remained unreachable. The next day, a message arrived. "Forgive me, Leoncio. I met another man and fell in love with him." The young man nearly dropped his phone. His hands trembled uncontrollably. He quickly dialed Lure's number again, but she didn't answer. "Don't call me anymore," she wrote a minute later. Leoncio barely restrained himself from smashing the phone against the wall. How could she, after all the words she said to him? And he, like a fool, was waiting for their meeting, and she just betrayed him. Leoncio threw himself onto the bed and, unable to hold back, burst into tears. By evening, he developed a fever. He called the office to inform them he wouldn't be able to come to work the next day. He slept through the entire next day. The fever subsided, but Leoncio couldn't get up and motivate himself to do anything. He just wanted to forget. Fortunately, the next day was Saturday, and he didn't have to go to work. Leoncio spent the entire day lying in bed again. He hardly ate anything. On Sunday, he got into the car provided by the company and drove out of town. He wandered through the surrounding fields for a long time, trying not to think about anything, but he couldn't erase Lure's image from his memory. The girl stood before his mind's eye as if alive. No matter how much Leoncio tried, he couldn't help but feel love for her. "I must let her go," he said aloud. She chose someone else. Returning home, Sanchez canceled the ticket, took a bath, and shaved, determined to start a new life without Lure. He blocked her number to stop checking for incoming calls and messages every minute. On Monday, the young man went to work, and familiar life once again swept him into a whirlwind of events. Leoncio tried not to dwell on the past or think about the future. All he had left was the present, and he was ready to act and seize every opportunity it offered. He succeeded in everything he undertook, and with each success, he ascended to higher peaks. Eventually, Leoncio Sanchez left the company that had opened so many doors for him, returned to his homeland, and started his own business. Luck favored him in all his endeavors. His business generated more and more income, and one day Leoncio became one of the most successful and wealthy people in the country. "So what do you think my mother did?" Sanchez heard the question, which seemed to carry an Arctic chill. He blinked, pushing away the memories, and focused on Blanca's face. She looked at him with hostility. "She found someone else 2 weeks before the wedding. Isn't that enough?" he retorted angrily. The blank expression on her face ignited as she gazed at the millionaire in astonishment. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, bewildered. Leoncio stood up from the table and turned to look out the window. Long-forgotten feelings of resentment, powerlessness, and despair surged back into him with renewed force. "So she kept this from me," the man bitterly uttered. Blanca remained silent, casting her eyes down. She no longer harbored hatred towards the millionaire. Something in the man's posture and the tone of his voice made her reconsider her opinion of him. "I don't know anything about it, but I'm certain it's a mistake," she whispered. "After all, my mother was already pregnant with me 2 weeks before your wedding." Leoncio felt as though he misheard. He turned to the girl, staring at her incredulously. "What? But that can't be." Blanca bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. My mother told me that you spent the night together before your departure. That's how I came into existence," she said softly. Leoncio nervously ran his hand through his hair and sat down. Then he closed his eyes, pain contorting his features. "Is it true?" he asked, without lifting his gaze. "Just don't lie to me, please. I know what people are capable of for money." He looked at Blanca. She was as pale as a sheet. "I know you don't believe me," she murmured, "but I want to get to the bottom of this myself. I've always dreamed of seeing my father, of feeling what it's like to be a beloved daughter. I've always been deprived of that. My mother said my father died, but one day I found her diary and learned everything." Leoncio looked at Blanca, unsure whether to believe her, but his heart squeezed in response to her words. He no longer saw her as a brazen hypocrite. No, there was something in her eyes that made her seem fragile and vulnerable. He wanted to embrace her like his own daughter. to stroke her hair for a long time, soothing her worries and instilling confidence in her. For tomorrow, I think only one person can give us the right answer. It's Lure, the man finally said decisively. But she doesn't know I'm here, the girl said, frightened. I got a job with you without her knowledge. She doesn't think highly of you. I've heard her say many times that you're a coward and a scoundrel. When she saw you on TV, Leoncio flared up. So that's what Lure thinks of me, he thought to himself. Then he stood up decisively and, circling the table, extended his hand to Blanca. Let's go, señorita. We need to resolve this as quickly as possible. Your mother will have to give us an answer. They left the office, descended in the elevator, and got into an expensive car driven by an elderly chauffeur. Where to, Mr. Sanchez? He asked. Leoncio, who nodded at Blanca, the girl gave the address, and the car set off. On the way, Leoncio and Blanca remained silent. Finally, the car stopped in front of a rather affluent house. The man and the girl got out of the car. Is Lure's home? Leoncio asked anxiously. Yes, she's working remotely, Blanca replied. Leoncio hesitated. Perhaps it was worth warning her not to catch her off guard, but Blanca shook her head. No. Let's just do it now so she has no way to retreat. Sanchez nervously swallowed. Blanca took a key from her purse and opened the door. They entered the bright hallway. Mom, it's me, Blanca called. Is everything okay? Leoncio heard a painfully familiar voice coming from somewhere very close. He suppressed the urge to rush into the adjacent room and embrace Lure. Yes, but I'm not alone. I have a guest with me, and he wants to see you, Blanca announced. Who is it? The woman replied, and Leoncio heard the sound of a chair being pushed back. Moments later, Lure appeared at the threshold. She was wearing an elegant dark green dress and a white cardigan. Her hair was shorter than in her youth, but still the same shade of red. It cascaded in voluminous waves over her shoulders. Lure's gaze remained unchanged. Leoncio once again saw the same blue, mischievous eyes of the young woman he still couldn't forget. However, when Lure realized who stood before her, shock flickered in her eyes. She anxiously covered her mouth with her hand. Hello, Lure, Leoncio murmured softly. His hands trembled. His heart pounded desperately in his chest. What are you doing here? Lure asked harshly, finally regaining her composure. She crossed her arms and looked at the man with hostility and coldness. I came to find out the truth, Leoncio admitted. What truth are you interested in? Lure retorted. At that moment, Blanca intervened in the conversation. Mom, are we just going to stand in the doorway? Let's go into the room. Lure shifted her gaze to Blanca, and her facial expression softened slightly. She silently turned and headed into the living room, with Leoncio following her and Blanca bringing up the rear. As everyone sat down, there was palpable tension in the room. Sensing it, Blanca decided her presence was unnecessary. As soon as the girl left, Leoncio couldn't hold back and spoke as though all those years hadn't passed. Why are you angry with me? It was you, not me, who didn't answer my calls, and then wrote that you met someone else and fell in love. Lure raised her eyebrows in astonishment. What? I never wrote that, she exclaimed. Clara, I was pregnant and waiting for you to tell you about it in person, not over the phone, and you just disappeared and blocked my number. Are you saying I made it all up? Leoncio replied in the same tone. Lure looked at him with confusion there. Then her eyes clouded over for a moment, as if she was trying to remember something. Wait, before that happened, I lost my phone. I was sure it was on my nightstand, but it wasn't there, and the next day, I found it under my pillow. It was very strange. I never put it there, but I was so glad to find it that I didn't think much of it. I thought I'd see a bunch of missed calls and messages from you, but the phone was empty. So I called myself only to hear that my number was blocked. I sat on the bed feeling out of sorts when my sister walked into the room. She asked me how I was doing, and I complained that I couldn't reach you on the phone. She probably found someone else, Federica shrugged indifferently and left the room. With these words, Lure helplessly shrugged her shoulders and cast her gaze down. And you believed her? Leoncio surmised. But she never liked me from the start. She probably didn't want us to get married. I wouldn't be surprised if I discovered she took your phone and wrote those messages. Lure flared up but couldn't retort. She's always been a rebel. And yes, she was against the wedding. She was jealous of my relationship with you, the woman confessed, and suddenly burst into tears. What's wrong with you? Leoncio trembled. He wanted to hold Lure close and never let go. Federica ran away from home when she turned 18. We don't know where she is or if she's alive. Our parents nearly went mad with worry. It undermined their health. I'm sorry, Lure, Leoncio whispered. He hesitantly stood up and approached her. Then he sat down on the couch next to the woman and gently embraced her, fearing she might push him away. But Lure, on the contrary, leaned into him and cried even harder. So, Blanca is my daughter? Leoncio dared to ask. Lure simply nodded in response. I'm sorry it all turned out this way, Sanchez said bitterly. I'm sorry I didn't see her being born and growing up. He lowered his head, feeling the pain of emptiness and loss. Lure gently ran her hand through his hair. But you're here now. Yes, you can't change the past, but you have the present now. When Blanca found you, she needs you more than ever. The millionaire lifted his head decisively. And I'll be there. Then he looked at Lure with tenderness. And you? Do you need me? Lure smiled and nodded in response. Yes, I do. I never could forget you. Hearing this, Leoncio Sanchez felt like the luckiest person on earth. He held tightly to the only woman he ever loved and, for the first time in 22 years, allowed himself to dream of a beautiful future. And now he was certain his dreams were destined to come true. Here on Karma's Twists, we share the most impactful stories of karma and justice that the world needs to see. Don't miss a single moment of good triumphing over evil. Join our community and subscribe. Be part of the movement that believes justice always wins.